Access to Democracy is sponsored in part by a grant from U.S. Federal Credit Union, a member-owned, not-for-profit financial cooperative serving the Greater Twin Cities community, and Sun Country Airlines, offering daily nonstop flights to New York, Dallas-Fort Worth, Los Angeles, and great vacation locations, plus newly added service to Washington, D.C. Visit suncountry.com.
Welcome to Access to Democracy, and welcome to Ken Pentel, the Green Party candidate for governor of the state of Minnesota. Ken has been here before in that capacity, and he's been with us as an environmentalist on other occasions, and a dedicated Green Party devotee and advocate of a healthy environment, which, as we look around, is going down the tubes rapidly. Welcome back.
Thank you, Alan. It's great to be here. Love it, love it.
Now, you were just at Farm Fest with the other gubernatorial candidates, apparently the only scheduled debate, unfortunately, between now and the election. How did that go yesterday, and tell us some of the things that transpired?
Well, I think, there may be some debates after the primary, but yesterday, Redwood Falls, big, farming community or farming gathering, and I think it went okay. I think ultimately I was able, at least from my point of view and from people that were watching it, to distinguish our campaign. And my goals were to articulate a position that we need to localize our economies. We need to get away from the centralization. A lot of money is leaving rural areas over the last 40, 50 years. We've seen a lot of people run off the land, and my goals are to invest in local communities to make sure dollars recycle in those communities, specifically in areas of energy efficiency, renewable energy, local sustainable organic farming. Also, I want to go to a single-payer health care, which would help the state as a whole as well. There was about 200, 250 people there. My message was countering some of the more corporate big ag interests who hang out there at Farm Fest. So there was kind of some friction going on, but I think ultimately the crowd respected the fact that I was honest with them, and I also explained to them, we've seen the farm community run down over the last, like I mentioned, 40, 50 years, and one of the reasons is our democracy is not honest. And I told them I think it's time.
The question is, it still a democracy?
Very good question.
That's a question that troubles me every day, in terms of the administration in Washington and how it trickles down to other administrations.
Well, I think that, part of it is that we've created a system that tolerates people like George Bush as president and Tim Pawlenty as governor and so on. I think that the structure is the problem because it allows for certain interests to basically maintain exclusive control over what we supposedly call a democracy. And so that's a big problem. And so I told the group yesterday, I said, why isn't there a Farmers' Party by now? Why isn't there a Labor Party? Why don't we be honest about the situation?
Well, there is a DFL party.
No, but the point is that the Farmer Labor Party, when it was a third party, had leverage in the state back in the 30s and early 40s. But as soon as they joined in with the Democratic Party, everybody can see what's happened to farmers and laborers ever since. It's been a slippery slope. And especially in the most recent past, we've seen both the Republicans, who've been horrendous in its effect on the health of rural economies and our strength in growing food in a way that maintains people on the land. And then we've also seen the Democrats go along with these trade agreements, North American Free Trade Agreement, General Agreement on Trade and Tariff, WTO. These are corporate trade agreements. CAFTA. They gut local economies, not only here but around the world, and then they send money out through flight of capital. What I was saying is that we need to unweave from these trade agreements, reward our economic system to localize our dollars in a sustainable economic practices, so we take care of the water, air, soil, habitats. And if farmers do that, they grow sustainably, locally, organically, then we will not charge them any property taxes. in the state of Minnesota, because we need people on the land who know how to grow our food locally as a security issue.
Well, property taxes for farms have gone up in the last 4 years, just the same as property taxes have gone up in the suburbs and every place else. The difference is that the farms have not been able to sustain it to a large degree. Farms are going bankrupt or going out of business regularly, and the small farmer is being just erased by these huge corporate farms.
Exactly, and that's a security issue, because any society that doesn't know how to grow its food and cannot provide its food locally puts itself at high risk, and that's what I'm trying to avoid. That's why I want to be governor. I want to be governor to start protecting the state, protecting it in food, in energy, so we have it sustainable locally. That's important. The other thing, of course, is I'm talking about the farmers. Why do they tolerate, and why does anybody in our society tolerate not having single-payer health care, universal coverage for everybody? Why is that? Because the structural system is not allowing us to translate our desires.
Because lobbyists, several thousand of them, spend millions of dollars to perpetuate a system that sees that executives walk out, and I raised this with Governor Pawlenty a couple of weeks ago, with $1.6 billion windfalls. Well, he said they don't really sell health care, and they're not in this state. I said, well, they live in this state, and their offices are in this state. I don't think that anybody should be walking out with millions of dollars in administrative or executive costs for health care when every other really democracy around the world functions with single payer.
That's right. And the thing is that it's real simple. You're born with a health card. You go into the doctor, you go into the hospital, you get done with the procedure, they swipe your card, the bill goes to the state pays the doctor or the hospital. You don't see the paperwork. It's clean, it's simple. They work off of a menu with set fees.
Medicare.
That's it. Medicare for everybody. That's it. It should have been done. President Truman called for it. General Eisenhower called for it. And now 50 plus years later, we still don't have it. Exactly what you said. Centralized money interferes in the people's, what we want is a democracy. The democracy is supposed to reflect the will of the people. Right now it's reflecting the will of the moneyed interests, and they're interfering decade in and decade out. And so Minnesota in 2004 per capita was #1 in the country in the amount of money spent lobbying of any state. Over $42 million was spent lobbying in the state of Minnesota. Last year, $54 million in 2005. So it keeps going up and up and up and up. And the public is not either aware of it, or they become just cynical and jaded about it and give up on the system. And there's huge consequences when you give up, because there are central moneyed interests who fill the vacuum. And so you and I get stuck with bad policy.
And I've heard so many of my students say to me in college when I urge them to register and vote, what does my vote mean? I can't make any difference. The system is against me. And I hear it all the time. And the fact of the matter is, until people wake up and get out there and turn the vote around, we're going to be either living with this system or we're going to be drowning with the system, which is what I fear. Whether it's renewable energy, whether it's global warming, whether it's the war in Iraq,
right.
Whether it's any of these things, take your pick. Talk about any one.
Right, exactly. And the point is that if we're talking about ecological issues, gutting, basically we're loading the atmosphere with carbon, baking the planet. We had the hottest 6 months in recorded history of the planet, the first 6 months of this year. And the response at the state legislature, there was no snow on the ground for 3 months in the middle of winter. Okay? Their response was indifference, and then they went and took the public's time and money.
Regular climate change is what they sell. Yeah. The fact that the ice caps are melting, the fact that the oceans are rising, the fact that we had more hurricanes last year than we have had in, I think, decades, they say is just regular climate change.
Some people do that because of the moneyed interests who dominate our political system do that. But the thing is they took our public time, they took our public resources, and they invested it in a billionaire to build a stadium. This is dysfunctional. This is misguided. I am trying to be governor of this state, to start representing the state of Minnesota honestly, through our democracy and through our economy. Right now, it's dishonest. We're not being honest about what's costing us. So when commercial interests, generally it's a Chamber of Commerce, who are the biggest givers, this is old money, the sprawl builders, big energy, these are the big moneyed interests who interfere in our political system, okay? And they have done it for decades and decades and decades, using the law firms as conduits to write the language that they need, okay? So what we end up having systems that are highly wasteful. So when Governor Pawlenty says he wants to reduce taxes, and yeah, he may be able to reduce taxes on individuals, but the infrastructure taxation that we all pay for is huge. Just think about all the stuff we've thrown away in landfills and incinerators. That has cost us 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times in taxes to throw something away, rather than require manufacturers to make durable goods, repairable goods, which are a far more economically strong position.
Or recyclable goods.
But recycling is an excuse for consumption patterns. The key is we need to reduce consumption patterns. So what ends up happening, in 1989, Minnesota is producing 900,000 tons of solid waste. We have a reduce, reuse legislation ready to go, okay? Industry comes in, interferes, replaces it with a recycling and disposability legislation. Okay? We end up now going from 900,000 tons, 10 years later, we're over 2 million tons in solid waste. So I tell the governor, and I tell the Speaker Sviggum, you cannot tell me that you're representing less taxes and less government when you allow this to happen. Because what you're saying is this: we're going to let industry maintain consumption patterns and increase it, at the same time dump all the garbage on the taxpayer. And then we have to clean it up. Look at electronics. You bring an electronics item in now, and they say it costs more to repair it than to buy a new one. So now we end up getting stuck cleaning up our landfill space with tax dollars for junk and toxicity, poisoning our resources and our bodies and our families and our futures. And then we have to send money, flight of capital, out of the state to go buy the replacement product from Hewlett-Packard or Sony or whatever, and then bring it back into the state only to be junk again in a short period of time.
I'm smiling because I recently bought I won't mention the manufacturer, DVD player. After about 4 months, it didn't work. I took it to be repaired, and because the 90-day warranty was up, I took it to be repaired, and I was told, forget about it, junk it, go buy a new one, which is what I did, which is exactly what you're saying.
Exactly, and this is the dishonesty of the Republican Party. The dishonesty of the Republican Party is this: they want to reduce taxes and less government, but they're not talking about the infrastructure costs, energy alone. We know from the point of production to the point of use, we are losing over 60 to 70% of our energy in just waste. But the power company makes more money when we use more energy. So they've rigged the deck through legislation and at the state capitol, XL Energy, for example, to the point where we are dependent on energy when we turn on the light switch, and we are wasting well over half of it into the atmosphere. We could be investing in energy efficiency, reducing our consumption, reducing our cost of living, keeping money in people's pockets, and eliminating all the problems associated with coal and nuclear and electricity. Cogeneration, energy-efficient windows, lighting, motors, refrigerators. My administration,
How
the
about
Pentel,
wind energy,
well,
which we have talked about on this program?
But first, Alan, we've got to focus on saved energy. It must be energy efficiency up front. Then we'll add the capacity. Then we'll add the wind. We'll add the solar. We'll add the geothermal. That's fine. But first, we have to have an economic system that's honest. We reward for healing the earth. We reward for restoring the earth. So all reward systems in taxation in the Pentel Proventure, and my running mate is Deneen Proventure from Mound. She's fantastic. All reward systems lead towards sustaining on planet Earth, living within our means. That's one of my goals. Same thing with the farmers, same thing with the repairable goods over the disposable goods. We reward for living in balance in the Earth. And if we start going to energy efficiency and providing our own fuels locally, then we need no longer interfere in other parts of the world, which creates war and havoc that we are now involved in, and death and dying that's going on, and ecological collapse in our dependency in oil, for example. If I reward for pedestrian planning, bicycle planning, trains in our state, rather than the continued dependency on the automobile, which is killing us, literally killing the Earth. We're baking the planet with our auto dependency. And the